Hello, Zooters. Hello, team members. Good to be live again. Good to be back in our platform. I think it's going to be an exciting webinar we have planned for today. Before we start into our today's topic, I just want to let you know two housekeeping things. I think most of you will have noticed that we have a new partner. We are really happy to announce that Hyperice is our new partner, that we were able to extend or to take over from the Team Zoot United States. They've been a partner with them last year, and we have been able to extend the discount code you get from them to Europe. And just a quick guide on how to find more details about our new partner, Hyperice. Just go to our teamzoot.eu page as usual and click on Hyperice. By the way, that's also the place to find out all details about our nutrition partner, Ministry of Nutrition. And just click on Hyperice, put in our original password, and you can find all details about our partner right here. Please be aware that not all of the products they offer are on sale for us. This is partially due to the fact that we have Professional Sports Recovery as a compression recovery partner, and some products that are allowed to be sold in the States are not available in Europe. So just bear this in mind and go through this, and you can find all details here. The second announcement I want to make is pretty straightforward. It's the virtual time racing series again. So last weekend in November, we start our 5K virtual series. All details can be found on our homepage as well. It's 2 weeks time. Get ready and dial in a 5K run for the last weekend, Saturday or Sunday, doesn't matter. Just make sure to send it to your team captain, or if you don't have a dedicated team captain, go to our page and search for Tim Volvedang. He is taking care of all other regions, and he is also accepting the records from Strava or Garmin or whatever platform you're using to take in your score. So with without further ado, I would like to go on to today's topic. We're really happy to have MON as nutrition partner for our team and have been able to negotiate a really great deal for you. I think you have shown the details already on our page. You get 25% off on your first order, and for every recurring order, it's 15%. Just check the details on our team partner page, as I have just shown you the navigation of it. And today is about when to use nutrition, what is important to keep in mind. But I'm not the right person to tell you all the details about it, because we have an expert from MON today in our call. He is the product developer of them and is also a consultant on nutrition. And let me say hello to Robert. Hi, Robert. Thanks for dialing in tonight. We're really happy.
Hi, Manuel. Thank you for being part of this, or letting me be part of this. I'm super excited to show you share my thoughts on nutrition to your team.
That's very nice, because I think everybody, regardless of level, if of beginner, amateur, or like a semi-professional athlete, all of them need nutrition and are basically having thoughts about it. And this is the right place to get knowledge about it, ask you questions about it. So guys, if you are on YouTube, just post your questions in the chat below the live window, and we will feature questions after the presentation. Robert is gonna just talk us through basic principles and what about what to take care of their product they offer, and we will try to answer all of your questions. So I would say, if you want to start, Robert, I would hand over the word to you. And yeah, we are excited about learning more about nutrition.
Thank you, Manuel. Before I start with the slides, I would just like to share some words about me. Around 4 years ago, we started this little company. We were just 2 people, and my background is I studied nutrition until 2001, and around 5 or 6 years later, I was already part of a professional sports team as a nutritionist. And from then on, I coached different teams, one professional bike team, a soccer team. I coached some professional triathletes also. And I always had access to all kind of products that are available around the world. I think you know that lots of products come from England, also from USA, some products come from Germany. But I never really found a product that I would like to take myself for every day for the rest of my life, without being like skeptical about the quality, being skeptical about possible harmful effects on my health, and especially my teeth, and also my microbiome. So I was trying to do something better, and this how MON Sports started. So the basic idea is always, I want to make products. I'm still training myself a lot. I'm a cyclist, not a triathlete, but nevertheless, I do a lot of sports and lots of training. And I want to have a product that I myself, and also not being hesitant to recommend to anyone else, to any professional athlete, to any recreational athlete, to any beginner, would like to use every day for the rest of my life. And this is kind of the basic idea behind our company. Today, I would like to show you a little bit about backgrounds too. I will also show you an example of how to measure performance from a physiological view, from a view of how much energy you use, how much carbohydrate you use, how you can fuel those training sessions well, how to recover properly, just to get a basic idea how to use sports nutrition in the best possible way. Okay, let's start here. I think this is super important. that not every recommendation that you hear in the news or you read in a newspaper, in a magazine, is fitted to us endurance athletes, because we are quite different to the general population. So it's always important to um, not compare like a person who goes running for 20 minutes 2 times a week or go on easy walks to someone who's training for an Ironman, for example. So some recommendations are quite the same. For example, it is for sure good to eat fruit and vegetable every day, or to not eat red meat every day, 3 times a day, for example. But for sure, some requirements and some recommendations are quite different to the general population. I think you know what I mean. It's not meant in a bad way or so, but we can't compare us, like I say, us as endurance athletes to someone who is not an endurance athlete. I give you an example. Here you see, normally it is recommended for different reasons to lower your sodium intake in your general nutrition. But for an athlete, this can possess a real problem, because if you sweat a lot and if you're a heavy sweater and lose a lot of salt, a lower sodium intake can cause problems, especially when losses are high. Or second example, fiber intake. For sure, it's healthy for your digestion and healthy for your gut microbiome to have an increased fiber intake in your general nutrition. But before a competition or before an interval running session, this might not be such a good idea. So here, two simple examples how we should always be aware that we are not everyone, like concerning our daily training, concerning competitions, concerning recovery. We have some recommendations that can be compared with the general population, but other recommendations that are quite different. To go more into detail, this is a big project that I worked on the last 3 years. I always wanted to know, when I go out training, I can see on my, especially when I go on my bike, I can see on my power meter, okay, I use, for example, 2,400 kilojoules in that ride. Because the efficiency of our body is not as good, it's only around 22-23%. You can easily calculate it in kilocalories, and that's why the kilojoules and the kilocalories are quite similar. And that's why you can say, okay, I did this on this ride and I burned this many calories on this ride. And then you have your basic metabolic rate, and then you can have a rough overview of how much energy you used. But then I still don't know how many grams of fats and how many grams of carbohydrates did I burn. And this is a super interesting tool. I worked on, as I said, I worked on this for the last 3 years together with a programmer. And with a physiological profile, with a metabolic profile, you can calculate exactly how many carbohydrates and how many fats you burned. And then you can also foresee how many carbohydrates I will burn when I do, let's say, 3 by 10 minutes zone 4 or threshold training, and 2 hours of easy zone 1 training. Then you can see, okay, I do this training tomorrow, I will burn this and this much energy, and I will use this many carbs, so I can prepare or feed accordingly. And you can also see here, when you increase your wattage here, we also made this possible for running now. So if you increase your wattage, you see that the carbohydrate use rises exponentially. So in this example, you see with 200 watts, the carbohydrate use per hour is around, let's say, 60 grams per hour. But if I increase the wattage by only 50 watts, the carbohydrate use is between 100 and 150 grams per hour. So slight rises in intensity lead to a really high rise in carbohydrate expenditure. And this is super important because our carbohydrate storage in our muscles is really limited. It depends a little bit on your muscle mass and on your weight, on your muscle weight, how many carbohydrates you can store. But for example, on a bike, you mostly use only the legs. So the glycogen storage is even more limited. So it's maybe between 300 grams for a woman, maybe of 55 kilos, and up to maybe 380, 400 grams for a heavier male athlete. So, for example, when you go out and you are prescribed to do an easy ride in zone one, let's say with 180 watts, and in this example with 40 grams carbohydrate use per hour, you do 4 hours. This can be easily managed because your glycogen stores are big enough. But if you increase the intensity, let's say from 180 to 220 watts in this example, the carbohydrate expenditure rises to, let's say, 90 grams per hour. And then if you do 4 hours, you empty your glycogen stores completely. And this is a really simple example to see how training and nutrition go hand in hand. So hard training, long training uses a lot of energy, uses a lot of carbohydrates, and you have to prepare your body to be able to train day by day by day and have, let's say, a development in your performance. Because if you neglect those two things, like power or heart rate and carbohydrate use, you will have problems with recovery. You will have problems to even finish your session. You will not see possible improvements or your individual possible improvements from training. You will especially not increase your VO2 max because enzymes for changing the function of mitochondria, for example, are not working the way they could work. You're also not having the full potential of your fat burning metabolism, because as we all know, fats burn in the flame of carbohydrates. So if you always train with low glycogen stores, your fat burning metabolism also doesn't work perfectly. So these are just a few examples to see that the connection between training and nutrition is super important. I give you one simple example. This is a training I did at some point last year. It's pretty much exactly 1 year ago. So I did some intensity, not very long ride. Let's 2 hours 48. The hard things hard and the easy zones super easy, but I still almost burned my whole glycogen store in just under 3 hours. So if you train every day and you train some intensity, just be aware to fuel properly. I will give you later an example how you can manage this with, for example, using our products. Second example, yeah, already said. Second example, easier ride. You see here just below 2 hours, intensity factor 0.6. So mostly a zone one ride. You see the heart rate is pretty low and steady. And you see that the carbohydrate use is way below the glycogen storage. So no problem to recover from this ride. Super long ride, still easy ride, but long distance ride, typical long, slow distance ride. And you see just with the amount of energy you burn, you also burn quite some carbohydrates, even if the intensity is super low. If you're interested in using the software, it is, for now it's free. You can try it out. You can enter your metabolic profile and connect it with your Wahoo or your Garmin or even with Strava and upload your files directly. As I said, we are also working on running, and it's super interesting to see to see day by day how many carbohydrates you burn, how you feel. You can also you can also plan workouts to see how many carbohydrates you will estimated burn for the next training, and get a super good idea of how nutrition and performance or training work together. You can also plan your nutrition. There's lots of recipes included, and just get a good idea of energy used or burned and energy intake in comparison.
Can I raise one question directly?
Yes.
I find this super interesting because this gives a clear-cut answer on how much energy somebody has to use, but what input factors does the software need? I was able to see that you need to put in your weight and other metrics, but what does it need, and where would members be able to get the software? On your page, or it should be distributed later?
Yeah, as I said, for now it's free. It's you see the name. It's Sentiero Analytics. You can just find it in the internet. And the numbers you would need to get good calculations is your body weight, is your VO2 max, and is your VLA max. Maybe it's a little bit complicated for a beginner. I try to explain it quickly. I mean, your body weight is clear because this defines your glycogen store and your basic metabolic rate. The VO2 max is the most important, or one very important factor in measuring endurance capacity. So, for example, world-class athletes have VO2 maxes of between 80 and 90 milliliter per minute per kilogram body weight, and beginners are in the range of 30 to 40 milliliter per minute per kilogram body weight. It is highly trainable, but also a little bit genetically, dependent on your genetics. And the VLA max is a super interesting parameter. It just shows your anaerobic capacity. The VO2 max is more your aerobic capacity. The VLA max is your anaerobic capacity. For example, if you see two cyclists, is a good example. The sprinter would have a high VLA max. He can produce a lot of watts for like 10, 20, 30 seconds, but cannot go for 1 hour at a very high pace because his muscle structure is different to, let's say, a climber who can't do the sprint but can go on a long, high pace. So his VLA max, his anaerobic capacity is pretty low from the climber, and the anaerobic capacity of the sprinter is pretty high. So if you don't know it, you can just estimate it. Let's say a long distance triathlete normally has a pretty low VLA max, and someone who is a beginner and has never done any endurance training is probably rather a little bit higher. And someone who is really good in, let's say, sprinting and has no problems to put 1500 watts on the bike for 10 seconds for sure has a higher VLA max. And the background is that if you have a low VLA max, you just burn less carbohydrates at the same intensity. But these are all the numbers you need. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, maybe it's super interesting to note for at least German members that you can get support from your insurance to do a sports physios analysis, and you get all the dimensions you mentioned from this analysis. I do it every 2 years and know these values from myself, and it would be easy for me to use the program. So if you are like a established triathlete and know what to do, it's always good to check your metrics and do the sport analysis. But also if you're a beginner, it's like recommended to do it anyways to check your health and where to train, where your body zones are, and you would get these metrics that you can use in the platform to use it.
Yeah. I mean, there's other platforms too, like Insight, for example, that use more or less the same principles, but I don't think they have the same connection with nutrition as we do. Okay. This should not be our main topic today. I just wanted to show you how important it is to think about training and the connection to nutrition. Maybe we start really with the basic idea of how you should fuel an easy training, let's say a base training. I don't know if you're familiar with the zones, but I think a zone model is pretty easy. Like zone 0 would be a recovery pace, zone 1 would be easy fat burning pace, zone 2 is really highly discussed right now because it's probably super efficient if you don't have that much time, but also uses a little bit more carbohydrates. And all the zones higher, maybe you also know it as tempo zone, that would be zone 3, threshold zone would be zone 4, VO2 max would be zone 5, and anaerobic capacity would be zone 6. So I don't know if you're familiar with those zones, but I think it's an easy model. So the basic idea is that if you train easy, as we saw in my examples, you primarily use fat or free fatty acids as an energy source, but even slight increases in intensity lead to a higher carbohydrate use. And it is discussed up and down and a lot in the media, and also especially for not super like world-class athletes, how to improve your fat burning metabolism. And different models have been up for the last years, like low carb training or sober training. But from my experience, it's pretty dangerous to deal with the problems that can come with those kind of strategies. So we developed a product that is perfectly to increase your fat burning metabolism in the first part of a training session. It's called a slow carb, and it has or includes carbohydrates that are not as easily accessible as, for example, glucose, and that can also leads to low rises in blood sugar, and also are not as easily absorbable as, for example, glucose or fructose carbohydrates. So if you use the slow carb product in the first part of an easy session, it's a good way to increase the burning of free fatty acids. And later in the session, effects like insulin or like are less important, and therefore in the second part of the training session, more easily accessible carbohydrates are preferable. So that's why we of course also created other carbohydrate drinks that are perfectly to use, for example, in the second part of this kind of session. Why would you use more carbohydrate dense product in the second part of the session? The goal is that you fuel every workout well to not make the energy deficit too big. So a huge energy deficit also always leads to longer recovery times, always leads to higher cortisol levels and less training adaptation. So it's always a good idea to fuel well, especially when you go long or when you go with higher intensities. So, for example, in this case, I would start with, as I said, with a special slow carb drink. In the first part of the session, let's say you do a 3-hour bike ride, and you would use this for the first 90 minutes, maybe combine it with some solid food like our porridge bars. And later you can use more concentrated carbohydrate drinks, like, for example, our power carb, and also combine it with more solid food. What is different to like an intensity training? I mean, in the more polarized training model, you would not train as much in the so-called tempo zone or in the zone 3. You would mostly use zone 1, maybe a little bit zone 2, and then zone 4 and upwards. So as we saw in the first slides with the software, the carbohydrate use rises exponentially and therefore also needs to be replenished. And it's also a good way of training the carbohydrate absorption, because I think this is a big topic, especially in long endurance events like the Ironman. Your body for sure does not have enough glycogen stores to make it to the finish. So you need to be able to fuel as many carbohydrates as possible per hour. And normally we can digest, let's say, 60-gram carbohydrates per hour. But if you combine different sources of carbohydrates, let's say a glucose source and a fructose source, then you can go higher, up to 90 grams. And if you train it training would look like a high carbohydrate diet in general, plus a high carbohydrate intake during certain training sessions. The carbohydrate uptake per hour can be increased up to 120 grams. I saw triathletes, long distance triathletes that went up to 150 grams per hour. This is really individual and for sure needs to be trained way ahead of the competition day. So, example, these are the second two carbohydrate products we have is the fast carb and the power carb. The fast carb could be used, for example, is 40 grams per hour in half a liter of water. And if it's a hot day and you drink a lot, you can easily achieve up to 80 grams carbohydrates per hour, for example, for a 90 to 120 minute interval session. This also counts for running, not just for cycling or swimming as well, of course. Or you can take the power carb that is a little bit less sweet and can be higher concentrated, so you can even use 80 grams in half a liter of water. As I said, don't expect that you can use high amounts of carbohydrates during a competition, especially on a hot day with your race pace. You really need to train this way ahead of time to be able to digest those higher carbohydrates amounts.
May I ask a question right now?
Yes.
I've just received a question from a member.
Yeah.
About what training volumes are you talking here? Is it like when the training exceeds 1 hour, or is it above 2 hours? What rough guidance can you give on those classifications for the training intensity or the training length?
Yeah, I don't think the training length plays a decisive role. As soon as you start working out, let's keep it like this, or let's say it like this, as we saw in the curve that is exponentially rising, you burn carbohydrates. Even if you go super easy, you burn carbohydrates. If you go super hard, you burn a lot of carbohydrates. And if you train almost every day, it's always a good idea to fuel your workouts. Of course, when you train, let's say 2 times a week, and you go running for 1 hour on, let's say, Tuesday and Saturday, then probably is no problem to recover from those workouts, because you either don't burn up or don't use your whole glycogen storage in that 1 hour, and you have enough time to fill up your glycogen stores to the next session. But as soon as I would say, if you train more than 5 or 6 hours per week, this really plays an important role, because your body, especially if you do some intensity training, will always use a lot of carbohydrates. And it's also a good idea to, let's say, you have a basic metabolic rate of, let's say, you're 70 kilos heavy, you have a basic metabolic rate with an easy office job, just an example, of around 2000 kilocalories. You do a 2 hour bike ride with some intensity, you burn, let's say, 1500 calories, and it's 3,500 calories, even with just a 2 hour bike ride. And of course, talking about sports nutrition, also healthy nutrition, you would not like fill up or replenish those 3,500 calories with mostly fats, for example. You would mostly use healthy carbohydrates like whole grains, like fruit, like vegetables. You would use a little bit protein. You would also use a little bit of fat. I think everyone also has his own way of feeling the best, and everyone will find a good way for him or herself to feed well. But most of the energy should be replenished with carbohydrates. This way, the body learns to absorb those carbohydrates and will be more competitive in a competition scenario, let's say it like this. So to train the gut does not only mean fueling well on the bike or during a run or when swimming, but also fueling well outside of the training with enough carbohydrates.
I find this super interesting, because basically you're saying don't trust your gut feeling or your body feeling, because you could do better if you feel right. I think a lot of people who don't do any nutrition in their trainings or workouts, or also maybe in races, think they can get along with taking no nutrition, but in fact they're missing out opportunities. It's a massive field of improvement when they take nutrition, not only during racing but also during training. I don't know if this is really connected, but I've been listening to the story of the Whoop founder, and he basically says by observing all this data with his company, they realized people shouldn't trust their body feeling. I mean, this is why the pandemic spread 2 years ago. People weren't not able to realize that they were infectious, but still trusted their gut feeling. And he goes that he needs that his band, his fitness band, helps to find out what your body does not tell you. And I think this at least will hold true a bit for what you've said. People can get along with non-nutrition for sure, but if you feel right, you have less recovery. Recovery is shorter. You maybe not getting ill, or you're not getting into any issues, and you can make the most out of your training.
Yeah, this is exactly my experience. Like, you can get all the training right, you can all the sleep right, and you can get a good nutrition outside of the training. But the training nutrition really plays an important role in daily recovery, in adaptation, in performance, and is often forgotten, especially in recreational athletes. That's absolutely true. And here you can, I'm not talking about this because I want to sell products or anything, but this is really my experience from, I also work as a trainer, and my athletes always say, okay, since I started fueling my workouts well, my performance really increased by quite a bit.
I think
this
you
is
will,
also
you
how
will
the professional
break down
cyclists,
these.
for example, are working in the last years. The old school method was, maybe it's funny, but actually it's not super funny. Like 10 or 15 years ago, you typical training camp scenario, you are in Mallorca, you go on a 6-hour bike ride, and you will only drink water. And the guy who's still the strongest in the last hour is, yeah, highly regarded because he managed to just go with water for 6 hours. Today, the the professionals do it completely different. They make a plan for feeding, and they fuel with 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour, even on an easy endurance ride. And they make stops to eat rice cakes, or even at a coffee, eat a cake or something. That's okay on an easy ride, but they still manage or still look for the numbers and try to really get between 60 and 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. For example, if they do the next day and they do some intervals on long uphills or something, they go up to 120 grams per hour because they already are preparing their digestion for the scenario that will come 2 or 3 months later in the first races. And maybe we are not the same, we're not professional cyclists, but the basic principles are more or less the same.
I find this super interesting, and I think you will elaborate on it anyways, or will have covered this in your ongoing presentation. But looking on your homepage, I already realized you have plenty of products, but also offer a knowledge section, which helps people to find the right products. Right there, you go. And can you maybe elaborate a bit more on this? And I think this would be would have been covered by your presentation anyways. But what products are the right ones to choose from your massive assortment of different products?
Yeah. May I postpone it to the end of the presentation, because
Yes,
then
sure.
we get
Please
an
go ahead.
overview. Maybe I would go on with just one important factor, and then we can talk about the products a little bit more. Recovery is, of course, super important. I think it's often forgotten that not the training itself makes you stronger. The training itself makes you actually weaker, because you're weakening your immune system, you're weakening your homeostasis, you're getting weaker, and only with the right recovery you will get the benefit from the training and will be stronger than before the training. That's the basic principle of training, and this is often forgotten. So the recovery process is super important, and especially the first, let's say, 60 minutes after an intense or long training session is super important. And that's why I think you guys know the products, or the basic idea of a recovery shake that is a combination of all the amino acids you need to make your muscle cells recover well, and also have enough energy, let's say sugars, to replenish your lost glycogen. And a combination of those two elements, amino acids and glucose and other carbohydrates, is essential for a quick recovery process and also a perfect training adaptation. And that's why we also develop product in this range, recovery products. The classical recovery shake can be more or less taken after every training. It tastes a little bit like Nesquik, so really well or really good, and can be taken, for example, with dried fruit or a banana to increase the carbohydrate amount even more. It contains special amino acids that are important for muscle cell adaptation and also for immune system, because as we all know, especially after high intensity sessions, you're really vulnerable for all kinds of viruses. You talked about one before, or if your little daughter is sick, you might catch a cold really easily in this first 60 minutes. So it's always a good idea to recover the session properly and to respect we call it the open window effect, and really immediately take proteins and carbohydrates after the finish of the training, or even more important, after the race. And this recovery process goes on, especially in the first 60 to 120 minutes after a long or high intensity training session. And then, of course, it's a good idea, for example, to have some curry with rice and maybe chicken. Sorry, there's a spelling mistake, or some yogurt if you don't want to eat meat. So a good combination of carbohydrates, proteins, and micronutrients, for example, from vegetables, herbs, just as an example. And maybe one last example, maybe we can skip this one. This is a good example of a really good Ironman athlete that needs around 8.5 hours for completing the competition. We also made a product, especially if your accessibility to race nutrition is difficult, what is often the case in Ironman or Ironwoman events. Actually, we made a product especially for Laura Philipp. She's a sponsored athlete, and she requested a product that she could have on her bike and have all the energy she will need on the bike readily accessible in one bottle. So it's a concentrate of carbohydrates, and it's you can really make it pretty thick and dilute it with water that you get from the feeding stations. Maybe you can add some gels and maybe even some solid food, like she does it actually, to get she needs maybe 4.5 to 5 hours on the bike, depending on the course, on the weather, on the wind, the conditions. But then it's quite easy to ingest 600 grams of carbohydrates alone on the bike. And then on the running split, she would even take more of this race carb product, let's say 200 grams and maybe one caffeine gel, to reach another 200 grams of carbohydrate. And if she needs 8.5 hours to complete the race, she would be close to 95 grams of carbohydrates per hour. That's quite an optimal intake. It could maybe even be a little bit higher, but the carbohydrate absorption also depends on if it's really hot, or if the intensity is super high, if you are in top shape. It's all factors that needs to be respected. And with 94 grams, it's a really good carbohydrate intake. And now, coming back to our calculations, you could make a pace strategy, so you actually don't burn more than you can take in and have stored as your glycogen stores. So you can see, okay, I will have this intensity on the bike, this on the run. I will use, let's say, 130 grams of carbs per hour with this intensity. And for 6 hours, that would translate into, for 5 hours, this would translate into 650 grams of carbs. I can take in 550 to 600 grams, so no problem to make it to the run and even make it to the finish line. During the run, it might be a little bit less because of the running impact. The carbohydrate absorption is a little bit less. So here you cannot properly count 100 grams per hour. And these are all considerations that can be made before even starting the race. Okay, maybe one word to our products. If you want to know more about the products, probably it's the best to go on the homepage. It's all available in English too, and of course in German. All products are described, what, how much, when to use it. I'll give a short overview of the products we have. We talked about the slow carb. This is the preferred training product for easy, long, slow distance training. We talked about the fast carb. This is like the natural energy, carbohydrate drink that you would use for the everyday training. The power carb, if you want to make it a little bit more concentrated, and the race carb for special situations like an Ironman race. Then we have the recovery range with the classical recovery shake, like I said, that tastes like Nesquik, and a special product that is called Recovery 8 that we actually developed for soccer players that have super high muscular impact, lots of jumping, maybe interesting for after heavy or hard interval running sessions. Then we have the bar sessions. I have actually one here as a snack. The so-called porridge bars, super natural, sugar-free, healthy snacks, or can be used during any training sessions. And we have the gels. We are working now on new gels, but our idea was to make a gel that doesn't only taste like mango, but really contains mango. So it's real fruit, it's real energy, it's no artificial sweeteners, it's no citric acids that can be bad for your teeth. So we try to make the products as natural as possible. So this is the basic idea. And this is more or less our range. We are working on a protein shake right now. And we will also make more different gel flavors. But just have a look on our homepage. You can also find, as Manuel said, the Knowledge Center, the webinars that we did so far. We did a lot of webinars in the last 2 years with most of our sponsored athletes, with lots of trainers, with doctors, with psychologists. So some interesting topics, I think, to be found there. Okay, now I talked a lot. I have a dry mouth already, so maybe it's now time to give the word over to the listeners and ask us anything. What do you want to know?
Right. We have a couple of questions already received, and I think those questions could be answered in the Knowledge Center as well, as you have just elaborated how large this knowledge database already is. But I think one interesting question that is coming from Ingolf. Thanks for bringing this question up. He has two questions basically around the intake of salt. You said you can vary, of course, the salt on your taste. He says, let me bring it into the feed here. That's what he says. He says that it's you need to have enough salt to digest, and that your gut and your stomach is working. Do you have any rough guidance on how to measure your salt intake? Is it just per taste, or does it go on taste, or what is recommended?
Yes, good question. I think the sodium loss is super individual. So we measured sodium losses of, let's say, 300 milligrams of sodium in a liter of sweat, up to 3,000 milligram of sodium loss in a liter of sweat. So it depends on your genetics, it depends on the weather, it depends on your nutrition, it depends on your fitness, it depends on your training you did the day before. It's so many variables. So in my opinion, like measuring the salt content in your sweat is not really possible because it's a lot different from day to day. You can get a basic idea if you're a heavy salt sweater or not. As I said, we saw both extremes, even in professional athletes, and that's why we also developed different products. We have the normal range that is, as Ingolf said, not very high in salt, because also in the normal training process is not really necessary, especially for those who does not lose that much salt in their sweats. And we also have the heat product range that is higher in salt. For example, the race carb we especially developed for Laura, and she is not a heavy salt sweater, so she especially requested a low sodium content. For her, it works really well. For others, it doesn't. So they might to add some just salt to the product, especially if they're heavy salt sweaters. But as we see in this little example, nutrition and also race or training nutrition is super individual, and that's why we try to make products that work for the one end of the range and also for the other end of the range. But yes, we do have products that have more salt. This is the heat range. We have a slow carb heat, we have a power carb heat, and we will now also, I'm just developing a fast carb heat also. So you can always choose normal or lower sodium content in your product and higher sodium content. Maybe one addition to this super interesting study that just came out now, and it said that with events, even competitions up to 4 hours, salt is not super important. It's the carbohydrate absorption is not really dependent on salt. It's more training, like I said, train the gut. And with competitions up to 4 hours, your salt stores are normally enough to cover those losses and those needs. And if you don't have a competition the next day, the salt intake is not as important as we thought it would be maybe 2 or 3 years ago. If you're doing a Tour de France, or if you're training every day and sweating a lot and training a lot, then it's a different story. But normally, the salt intake through your normal nutrition is in our culture is high enough to cover those needs.
Super interesting. If anybody has practical questions about training your gut, I would recommend you to reach out to our team captain, Tim Wolvedang. He has been going through a lot of gut training to compete in a 100K ultra race and had been trying to train his gut specific for this race. And I find it interesting that you are trickling down your knowledge and the experiences and the lessons you've made from developing products with professional athletes, like with Laura Phillips. That's basically the same what we do with our Podium One race suits that are co-developed with Sam Long, for example, or Ben Hoffman or other athletes. We take these lessons and try to bring them into our like bread and butter race suits. So it's always good to just listen to what professional athletes on the one hand, but also like on the other hand, regular day athletes need. I have 2 more questions received. One is more a statement from Berit. She says that she uses your slow carb product, which works for her very fine because she's not getting hungry, and maybe that's due to no insulin spike, and just a statement that I wanted to share. Another
this
interesting.
is actually a feedback. This is actually feedback we got from Nordic skiers that do. I mean, Nordic skiing uses a lot of energy because of the cold and the high intensity, because you use all your muscle, maybe comparable to running. And they say since they use this, they're not getting hungry even in 3-hour training sessions. But I would still use a little bit higher concentrated carbohydrate products in the second part of the training, just to not overcompensate in the meal after the training, because this is always the problem. Don't make the energy deficit too high, so you can have perfect recovery afterwards and not eat too much or overeat.
Yeah, yes, right. If you're falling into a hole after your training, this is when you know you didn't feel right during your training.
Exactly.
Another important question that is coming from Devil Does Triathlon. I think everybody has this always in mind when racing. He talks specifically or has a question about caffeine intake. It can upset your gut. It can change your race quite dramatically. What would you say on caffeine intake? Take it at all, only at the later stage in race? Be careful. Are there any recommendations on level?
Yeah.
Can you train? What are your thoughts on caffeine intake?
I think caffeine is a really well studied supplement and is one supplement that actually works. Um, I mean, we have tons of studies that show that you are more alert. It may be the connection between the muscles and your brain work a little bit better. The coordination is better. Maybe you're also more awake and performant in the last stage of a race. But it depends on so many factors. Like he already said in these questions, heat plays a role. How much caffeine are you used to play a role? How glycogen depleted you are plays a role. So I would definitely try it in training. Don't use it only in racing. Try it out. Try it in different situations. Don't use too much. Like 1 gram of caffeine is too much, and 10 milligram of caffeine is probably not enough to have any effects. But let's say 100 to 200 milligrams, like in my example, during the running split, for example, can work and can actually make you a little bit faster, because maybe even the coordination, the I don't know how to say that in English, Ansteuerung of the muscle is a little bit better. Yeah.
The controlment
So
of your muscles, maybe.
yeah, just be sure to try it out before. If it works well, I would definitely use it. It can make you maybe a few minutes faster. And as you said, I would rather use it not too early. I would rather use it when we talk about the Ironman, maybe if you run 3 hours, 3.5 hours, I would use the first one maybe at 2 hours 20 and the second one at 2 hour 55 or so. So caffeine needs some time to reach the system, needs a few minutes, up to 20 minutes to have the peak. And you should have it when it really counts. And maybe a second consideration, if you take it too early, you might be too enthusiastic and overpace too early, and then you don't have the energy in the end of the race. So I would rather use it at the end of the race.
I think we all have been there and know how it feels if you're running out of energy because you've been going too fast in the beginning or middle section. So train it and get used to it. I think this is one of the best advices overall, to test your nutrition before racing. I would say there's one more question getting in, maybe the last question we can answer. Another question, maybe you can directly answer it.
Very, very, very interesting question. We have athletes, especially female athletes, that don't digest fructose at all, or are not really keen on using fructose in any products. And that's why we have also products that have less fructose. And the other end of the story, like for example, SIS is using in some products 1 to 0.8, so higher fructose contents, because they say that the absolute carbohydrate absorption is higher if you use more fructose. We made very good experience with 1 to 2 because the product is not too sweet. It works well, and with training the gut, you can even go higher than 90 grams of carbohydrates. We don't know the mechanisms exactly by now, but we have professional cyclists that can go up to 140 grams. We have one triathlete that went up to 150 grams, even with a 2-to-1 ratio. So it depends on the intensity I mean, we can all digest a lot more than 60 grams of carbohydrates when we're in front of the TV, for example, so with no intensity. And also, I mean, an Ironman competition is not all out all the time. You are in a, let's say, medium intensity range. You're in a, let's say, 150, 170 grams of carbohydrate use per hour intensity. And with this kind of lower intensity is no problem to digest more than 60 grams of glucose per hour. So that shouldn't be a huge problem. And if you do shorter, higher intensity events, you don't need that many carbohydrates, and then the 1-to-2 ratio is way enough. I hope I
Makes
could
sense.
explain it. Yeah. So, for example, for a short Bundesliga sprint triathlon race, maybe if you're 1 hour racing, 60 grams of carbohydrates is enough. And if you're doing a 2 hour bike race, let's say 150 grams of carbohydrates is probably enough. If you're going over 2 hours, then the intensity is probably a little bit lower, and then the ratios are not as decisive. Maybe they are when you're doing a 2 hour climb all out in between somewhere. But then the 2-to-1 ratio works really well too.
Thank you so much, Robert, for answering this question, all questions, and taking the time to talk to us tonight. I would say that we try to come to an end. There are no more questions right now open. I think everybody can see that you are really passionate about the knowledge and the body and what it takes to fuel you during training and racing. And this is, I think, the key ingredient of like convincing everybody to feel better for their triathlon trainings and sports. So thank you so much for taking your time and pointing out all the great resources that we can get behind and get through. I will mention the knowledge database one more time in our catch-up message tomorrow, and we'll also reference this presentation. Whom could members reach you if they have specific questions to follow up on? How would you be available?
We have like a question possibility on the homepage too, and if there's special questions, I can answer them, of course.
Okay, great. Once again, thank you so much for your time. I'm really looking forward to dial in my training with better nutrition to get more out of it. And we'll say have a great evening, and we keep in touch.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you for listening, all out there, and have a nice evening too. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where trouble melts like a lemon drops